The station named Aphelia Truss hung over the gas giant like a web of light and metal, every corridor thrumming with the sense that history was about to pivot. At 9 a.m. station time, Captain Ilya Markov stood in the main viewport gallery with his hands folded behind his back, watching a formation of incoming ships flare into existence from the deep gate's bloom. He looked calm enough that a passing technician saw only a tall figure in a dark uniform, shoulders squared, jaw set. Underneath the discipline, his heartbeat was fast, his thoughts busy. 10 years of human work had led to this day. 10 years of arguing for a seat in the polyglot Athril. 10 years of telling Earth's leaders that humans were ready for more than just scraping around their own star. He was not entirely convinced they were ready, but it no longer mattered. The other species were arriving. Beside him, Dr. Naila Qureshi watched the same descending arcs of metal and bio-grown hull with a different hunger. Her mind translated every shimmer into questions. How did their brains support telepathy? How did they protect themselves from overload? How did synaptic plasticity differ between species that freely shared thought and species, like humans, locked in their private skulls? She pressed a finger to the glass and felt the faint vibration of the station's systems. The ship trailing a cobalt corona belonged to the Threxil. She recognized the silhouette from 100 briefings and stolen sensor snapshots. Long-ribbed ventral structures to cool their neural resonators, aligned like an enormous harp. "Here they come," she murmured. She didn't realize she had spoken aloud until Ilya glanced sideways at her. "I see them," he said. "Try not to scare them in the first 10 minutes." "Scare them," Naila repeated, incredulous. "They read minds for a living, have an ancient telepathic relic tuned into their brain architecture, and we're the scary ones?" Ilya thought. "You have no idea." Out loud, he only said, "That's what worries me." Further along the gallery, Chizoba Adekoya had wedged herself between two civilian observers with an unobstructed view. She took notes, as fast as her wrist would allow in her slate. The angle of approach, the escort pattern, the light pulse codes along the hulls. Every gesture might someday become a cultural footnote. Behind her, Lieutenant Konrad Visser leaned against a support column, hands on his belt, eyes dark and assessing, as he watched the escort fighters reshaping themselves out of their docking cradles. He distrusted things that moved without visible thrusters. Mira Natarajan arrived late, hair hastily tied back, grease on one cheek. She had just come off a 12-hour refitting shift in the gate control room and was nursing a blister on her thumb. The discomfort did nothing to diminish the ridiculous grin that spread across her face when she saw the Threxil ship. "That is beautiful," she whispered. And for her, the word had the weight of an engineer's blessing. Heat sinks, energy flows, elegant redundancies. She was already wondering if there was a way to talk her way aboard. Tarin Patel stood pressed close to the glass, younger than most of the group, the station's pale light glinting off the thin data cuff around his wrist. His mind flickered from awe to half-formed jokes, to speculation on how Threxil mathematics handled non-linear feedback in psychic systems. He dragged his focus back each time with the stubborn insistence that had gotten him attached to this mission in the first place. He didn't want to sound like the most junior analyst in the room. He wanted to sound like he belonged. Behind them all, Daoud Mensa moved through the crowd like a quiet tide, exchanging nods with envoys, noting the position of every security guard and visible weapon and the absence of several others. He had dreamed of this since his first posting. A hall full of species. The first true diplomatic summit with humanity as more than an object of curiosity. He also knew that the more species you put in one space, the more ways there were for something to go wrong. He caught Ilya's eye. A tiny shrug passed between them. "Here we go." The Threxil delegation arrived at 10 a.m., escorted into the summit hall by neutral attendants from a dozen other worlds. They were tall, with elongated limbs and joints optimized for flowing, deliberate movements. Their eyes were rimmed with a faint bioluminescent ring that pulsed in quiet patterns as they walked, reflecting internal signal rhythms. Archivist Selennu moved at the front, hands folded, every step controlled, their mental discipline radiating like a low, steady tone to the Threxil around them. In Selennu's thoughts was a mixture of anticipation and qualified skepticism. The Threxil had met species before who begged for telepathic contact and species who feared it. They had not yet met a species whose inner lives were such an unknown that even their most skilled seers could only guess. Empath Khoruun's attention was less political. He moved beside Selennu with a floating, sensitive awareness, like fingers hovering over a harp before the first pluck. He felt the emotional weather of the hall, the wariness, the excitement, the cultural pride, the fear. The humans were sharp-edged presences, minds fully shielded from him by their biology, but their bodies, their micro-expressions, their clustered stance around their captain gave him hints. Seer Valkyrie walked a step behind, their own psychic field tuned not for moment-to-moment feeling, but for patterns across time. They had seen a dozen possible futures for this meeting. Some ended in useful alliance. Some ended in confusion. A few ended in corridors, sealed with bulkheads and emergency locks. One of those futures flickered across Valkyrie's awareness as they caught sight of a young human near the front, eyes wide behind his glasses, thoughts darting too fast to even guess their content. Valkyrie made a small private note. Unquiet minds often drew trouble. Introductions were made. The polyglot Athral delegates gave their symbol speeches in spoken words and light projections and scent clouds. Daoud stepped forward for humanity, in formal dress that balanced Earth heritage and cosmopolitan practicality. His voice was steady as he welcomed the Threxil, emphasized shared goals, lowered his tone when he mentioned their records of Threxil generosity toward new civilizations. Selennu replied with practiced grace, explaining the Threxil ethos of open thought, of shared memory maintained by their empaths and archivists. They spoke of the Osirai relic the Threxil had integrated into their traditions, a device called the Mnemonic Loom, buried deep on their world Vastrion Kal. It allowed ceremonial joining of minds, controlled glimpses into each other's mental landscapes. The loom, Selennu said, their bioluminescent eye rings, a calm azure, has touched minds from 8 species. It allows an understanding that transcends words. We use it carefully, and never without consent. As we welcome humanity into the polyglot Athral, we would be honored to demonstrate a mindful, respectful sharing. In the audience, Naila felt her pulse leap. This was exactly the sort of interaction she had dreamed of. At the same time, the careful scientist in her flared with questions. What was the loom's bandwidth? What kind of mental filtering did they employ? How did they model risk? Aloud she asked, what safeguards do you have in place for species whose neurology is structured very differently from your own? Selennu's gaze settled on her. Our empaths will carry the burden. The subject simply lets images and feelings rise. We only brush the surface, and we withdraw at the slightest sign of distress. Khoruun inclined his head fractionally. We have done this many times, to beings whose minds resonate, to beings whose minds do not. We have learned caution. Daoud stepped forward carefully. If a human were to volunteer for such a ceremony, how brief could you make it? 10 heartbeats, Khoruun replied. Enough to exchange impressions. No further. 10 heartbeats, Naila thought. 10 seconds, perhaps, in their unit terms. She knew enough about cortical firing rates to understand how much could happen in that span, how many patterns might cascade. But she also knew that humans handled enormous internal loads constantly. Ilya's instinct was to say, not yet, wait, study, negotiate. His duty said something else. Trust building, symbolic gestures, showing strength by not flinching from contact. He looked down the row and met Tarin's gaze. The younger man straightened, feeling the weight in that glance. Dr. Qureshi, Daoud said quietly, from a neurocognitive standpoint, is there an intolerable risk to a brief contact? Naila hesitated. She could imagine worst cases, but most of them required sustained links, feedback loops, deep sharing. A surface-level brush, 10 seconds long, monitored, with a telepath skilled in retreating. She thought of the centuries of isolation behind humanity, the decades of wanting to prove themselves, the way half of Earth would interpret a refusal. In terms of our volunteer, she said finally, I believe we can manage the risk. I will insist on full sensor coverage, and the subject must be able to withdraw consent at any point. For the Threxil empath, I do not have enough data to compute their risk. but they assure us they understand their limits. Cohenrod shifted, unhappy, but he kept his mouth shut. His job was to enforce decisions once they were made. Daoud's eyes returned to the human section. "We are not requiring this of anyone," he said, voice pitched to Carrie. "But if one of you feels called to represent our species in this way—" Tarin's hand rose before his conscious thought had fully caught up. He felt his pulse, his breath, the thin sweat on his palms. His brain teemed with reasons not to do it, and the deeper, older reflex that said, if someone has to go, why not you? Naila's heart clenched when she saw his arm. She saw his age, the potential years of work ahead of him, and the way he was trying to suppress a tremor. But she also saw his adaptability. He had moved between cultures growing up, languages and social codes mixing in his head until flexibility was his default. He might be the best suited of all of them to withstand a strange mental format. "Tarin," she said softly when he approached, "we can still choose someone else, someone with more field experience." He smiled, nervous and genuine. "You once told me my brain handles noise well. Time to prove you right." Inside, he thought, if I back out now, it will haunt me. And if I don't, and it goes wrong, it will still haunt me. At least this way I'm choosing the version where I did something. The ceremonial chamber was staged with neutral furniture, low lighting, no overtly alien or human symbols. In the center, a Threxil-developed interface rose from the floor, a set of curved frames, gracile supports for neural induction coils, a seat angled back just enough to be comfortable without encouraging sleep. "Think of it as a scanner, not as a spike through your head," Mira whispered as she checked the connections to the human monitors. "If anything looks strange to me, I'll cut power." "It's not your decision to make," Naila said, sharper than she meant. "We cut if he wants out, or if vital signs tell us he can't answer." They both knew that if something went wrong on the Threxil side, no human system could stop it. Khoruun took his place opposite Tarin within a matching framework tuned to Threxil neurobiology. His thoughts were a disciplined pond surface. Beneath that, currents of curiosity, a spark of professional pride, a faint thread of wariness. He had never touched a human mind. The lack of ambient resonance from their non-telepathic brains made them black boxes of unknown content. They activated the link. Cool. Transparent filaments of field aligned across the small distance between them. "Ready," Tarin said, more bravely than he felt. For the first second, he felt nothing at all. Then, like a hand pressed against a window on the other side of the glass, Khoruun's presence touched his mental periphery. Khoruun braced. He expected a stream. He found instead a storm. Human thought did not unfold in single lines. It exploded. Even with the slowdown effect of the loom's intermediary relay, Khoruun was hit with overlapping branches of association. The smell of cardamom from Tarin's childhood kitchen, overlaid with his first time seeing Earth from orbit. Shame at a clumsy joke at Academy. The fractured image of an old scar glimpsed in the mirror. The pattern of code on a screen at 3 a.m. The sound of a sibling's laughter. The gut-level lurch of entering microgravity. Underneath the cascade were layers that refused to stay separate. Fear of failure braided with a stubborn conviction that he could improvise. Terror at being judged inadequate, braided with private fantasies of standing in front of an admiring crowd. Regrets braided with relentless self-forgiveness that was never complete. Khoruun's training told him to skim the surface, but there was no true surface. Every impression came pre-linked to a dozen others. Every image dragged up more. He tried to retreat. The loom, ancient and half-understood, did what it was built to do. It amplified and echoed, opening channels into the Threxil empathic network so that others could briefly touch what he touched. Across the Threxil present on Aphelia Truss, and all the way down the link to the Mnemonic Loom on Vastrion Kal, pulses of human thought crashed like solar flares. Threxil in distant meditation rooms gasped, clutching at their skulls. Empaths doubled over, overwhelmed by alien colors. The raw, unfiltered way humans plotted disaster, joked about it, feared it, marched into it anyway. Khoruun's calm shattered. He screamed. The sound tore through the chamber, primal and stunned. His body convulsed against the restraints. The filaments of the interface flared too bright. Tarin felt a pressure, like the inside of his skull had been turned into a speaker for someone else's panic. He glimpsed, not through eyes, but through an intuitive reverse echo, how his mind looked from the outside. A knot of contradictions, fireflies of thought ricocheting faster than any telepath should try to track. Then the world became a blur of motion. Hands on his harness, Naila's voice shouting to shut it down. Alarms that ramped up and then cut as someone, probably Mira, killed the power to the whole stack. The link snapped. Tarin slumped, chest heaving. He was dimly aware of Conrad's arm locking across his shoulders, of the taste of copper in his mouth, of Naila snapping orders. He tried to say, "I'm okay," but the words came out warped. Across from him, Khoruun hung limp, eyes open but unfocused, their inner rings flickering with rapid, meaningless pulses. Several Threxil had collapsed to their knees. One was rocking silently. Another growled accusations in their own language, phrases that Daoud, who had spent years studying it, recognized as words for attack. Contamination. Treachery. "This was no mere sharing," one of them hissed. "You have crafted a weapon of mind." Daoud held up his hands. "You saw everything we saw. We gave you full monitoring access. We did not know this would happen." "Yet it happened," came a new voice, colder. Fleet Marshal Jalkar strode into the chamber, bioluminescent eye rings pulsing in sharp, clipped intervals. His personal guards fanned out behind him. He had arrived in system earlier than scheduled, his ship burning extra fuel in response to the alarm echoing through the Threxil network. He took in the scene in one sweep: the injured empaths, the trembling technicians, Khoruun's slack face, the human strapped into the chair. Inside, Jalkar's mind burned with outrage and something more painful: fear. The Threxil unity field had always been his anchor. To feel it suddenly roiled by alien fragments, by a human's fever dream of overlapping desires, was like feeling the ground under his feet liquefy. "We offered you understanding," he said to Daoud. "You gave us madness." "I gave you a volunteer," Tarin said hoarsely. He forced himself to meet Jalkar's stare. "If you think I knew what my mind would look like to you, I promise you credit me with far more foresight than I have." Naila watched Khoruun, saw the abnormal patterns on the monitors, patterns no longer purely Threxil. She understood, even then, that the damage was not localized. The Loom had sent copies of this event all along the empathic circuits back to its source. Somewhere deep on Vastrion Kal, the Mnemonic Loom would now be vibrating with a human imprint that did not belong there. In the hush that followed, she thought, "We did this. We walked into it eyes open. If there's a way to make it right, we will have to walk even further." The summit dissolved into emergency sessions. The polyglot Athril declared a moratorium on mind-bridging with humans. The Threxil withdrew, their ships sealing their hulls, their psychic channels thrumming with injured confusion. Tarin scans showed acute stress, but no lasting neurological damage. That did not comfort him as much as Naila hoped. He woke from nightmares soaked in sweat, hearing Khoruun scream over and over and seeing flashes of his own memories, distorted, paraded before an alien audience. Khoruun did not wake in any meaningful sense. His body lived. His mind wandered an endless loop. For the Threxil, the shock was worse. Their empathic network had always been a shared river of emotion and memory. In the wake of the contact, foreign eddies persisted. Laughing at inappropriate times, intrusive images of humans standing alone in crowded rooms, of people rehearsing conversations in their heads that they never had in reality. Sudden terror while doing mundane tasks, followed by a brittle, practiced joke to cover it. Flashes of self-awareness, sharpened into painful self-critique. "What we have touched does not blend," one senior seer said in a closed session. "It cuts." Fleet Marshal Jalkar argued for immediate isolation, for severing all Osari systems that might still carry the human trace. Others hesitated. The Mnemonic Loom was woven deeply into their culture and, as the scientists reminded them, into the stability of their shared field. The polyglot Athril issued statements. Humanity was placed under a cautious watch list. Trade remained open. Telepathic contact did not. Years moved. Aphelia Truss continued to orbit its gas giant, but its summit hall no longer hosted bright, open celebrations. Humans came and went on rotations as usual, but every time a Threxil vessel appeared on long-range scans, there was a tightening in the throat, a quiet recalculation. Naila returned to Earth sometimes, to lecture halls and interview panels, to endless procedural hearings. She saved every scrap of data from the 10-second contact. She built models of how Tarin's mental rhythms had intersected with Threxil harmonic patterns, how the loom might have amplified them. She thought constantly of Khoruun, of those eye rings flashing meaningless code. Tarin immersed himself in the work as well. The guilt never fully left him, but slowly he shaped it into fuel. He annotated his own memories from before the scan, as if they were case studies, trying to understand which of his thought habits might have been most destructive when mirrored inside a telepathic network.
On Vastrion Kal, the mnemonic loom changed. At first, the shifts were subtle, a faint noise floor of human-style imagery under the usual Threxil echoes. Then, the noise rose. Dreams in the empath caste bent toward human scenes. Daytime flashes of human emotions appeared without warning. The loom, never fully understood, had taken the new pattern and, obeying its ancient design, integrated it deeply. Archivist Selennu watched their people withdraw into themselves in a way Threxil never had before. Conversations that had once occurred wordlessly as background flows now carried static and stray human phrases. Young empaths reported a sense of standing alone within the group mind, separated by a film of anxiety. Selennu understood the risk, but they also, in quiet moments, wondered if something under the pain might be worth saving. The taste of solitude, the sharpness of an individual's unshared thought, had a strange, fragile beauty.
10 years after the first contact, at 8 p.m. station time, Naila sat alone in a small observation blister on Aphelia Truss, watching the gas giant's storm bands roll. She had slammed her palms against many metaphorical walls over the decade. Committee caution, Threxil silence, human fear of being labeled psychically toxic. Her slate blinked with a new incoming message. It was heavily encrypted. The origin tag said polyglot ethereal, but the inner content, once decrypted, carried the unmistakable stamp of Threxil neural formatting. It was a compressed sensory file. She allowed her implant to play it in her visual field. She saw through Selennu's eyes, a chamber beneath the Surat caverns on Vastrion Kal, lined with Osari filigree, a great lattice of pulsing conduits at the center, like a frozen lightning bolt. The mnemonic loom. She felt their emotion layered under the image. Dread, responsibility, stubborn hope. "We request human expertise," came Selennu's translated voice, quietly. "The loom is no longer stable. The human imprint introduced 10 years ago has not dissipated. It has grown within it, and through it, within us. There are those among us who would rather see it destroyed and accept the loss to our empathic caste than live with this intrusion any longer. I do not agree. What we have seen within this imprint is terrible and extraordinary. We do not understand it. We ask you to come, not as supplicants, as co-authors of what happens next." At 9 p.m., Naila, Ilya, Daoud, Mira, Chizoba, Tarin, Cohenrod, and Rurik crowded into a briefing room. The message played again on the central display. "It could be a trap," Cohenrod said immediately. His mind moved through tactical possibilities. Threxil ships catching the Starglint Voyager in a crossfire, sabotage in deep caverns, a pretext to arrest human specialists and blame them for whatever came next. Daoud's thoughts were heavier. "If they wanted pretext, they already have it. All they need to do is say your minds are weapons, and people will believe them." Mira tapped a fingernail against the edge of the table. "Listen to the power diagnostics embedded in that image," she said. "Those conduits are running hot. Whatever the loom is doing, it's drawing more energy than its base design allowed. It is going to fail, one way or another. It's only a question of whether the failure is catastrophic. The loom is directly entangled with their empathic network," Naila said quietly. "Their scientists made that clear at the summit. If the loom collapses in an uncontrolled way, everyone linked to it could suffer. We are not talking about one empath in a coma. We are talking about a civilizational wound, and we are the ones who gave it the infection, Tarin added. He did not flinch from the word. Naming it felt like a kind of honesty. If they are reaching out now, it is because they've run out of internal options. If we refuse, and they destroy the loom, that blood will be on us. Ilya listened, eyes half-lidded. In his head he revisited the moment he had looked at Tarin 10 years ago, the second when he had balanced risk and reward and chosen to go forward. That choice had shaped a decade of fear. He could choose ease now, decline, recommend caution, let inertia carry them away from danger. Instead, he heard his own inner voice ask, "So what are you for, if not this?" "We go," he said. "We go small. We go monitored. We go with every safety we can engineer. But we go." They left Aphelia Truss in the Starglint Voyager 2 days later at 7 a.m. station time, its new hull tiles catching the gate's activation wash in a cascade of pale blue. The crew moved through departure checklists with the practiced synchronization of people who had been working together for years. Underneath, each carried a private knot of emotion, dread, excitement, a fierce, quiet pride that they were the ones who had stepped forward. The transition to the Vastrion Kal system was smooth. The Threxil escort that met them was anything but welcoming. Gunports were visible, formation lines were tight. The Threxil command ship sat like a shark among smaller vessels. On the Voyager's bridge, Khoruun murmured, "Friendly neighbors. Considering their last real interaction with us put their empathic caste in intensive care, this is cordial," Daoud replied. The ship descended through Vastrion Kal's upper atmosphere at 3 p.m. local time. The world unfurled beneath them. Swirling cloud belts, luminous skies, sweeping organic architecture that grew from vast ridged trees and sculpted rock. The quarantine zone around the Surat caverns was the one place here that looked truly armed. Defensive emplacements ringed the sinkhole that led down into the earth. Threxil soldiers in dark armor stood at intervals, their usual fluidity replaced by rigid protocol. Selennu met them at the landing pad. 10 years had etched subtle lines of psychic strain into their manner. Their mental field held little of the previous serenity. Threads of anxiety and something like shame hung there, perceptible even to non-telepaths through their body language. "You came," Selennu said. "Of course we came," Naila replied. Inside, she added, "If you had asked 10 years ago, we would have come then as well." But she knew they hadn't understood the need then. It had taken a decade of slow unraveling. Selennu led them inward. They passed through layers of security, biometric scans, psychic filters, physical barriers. Each checkpoint bore the mark of Jalkar's influence. At one, they glimpsed the fleet marshal himself, conferring with his officers, his thoughts a tightly leashed stream. When he turned toward them, his gaze landed immediately on Tarin. "So we meet again," Jalkar said. "We never met the first time," Tarin answered. His voice only shook slightly. "You saw a recording of me being an idiot. I'd rather you judge me on more than that." Jalkar's jaw tightened. He wanted, deeply, to reject the human, to dismiss this entire mission. But the empathic currents around him told a story he could not ignore. His people's mounting instability, the whispers within the network of fracturing identity, intrusive images, new desires. "Selennu believes you can help," Jalkar said. "If you make it worse, there will be no time for apologies." "We are planning on making it better," Naila replied. "Otherwise, we would have stayed home." In the depths of the Surat caverns, the stone turned to something else entirely. Osari metal and ceramic had fused with rock over ages to create a space that did not obey ordinary architectural logic. Conduits arched like ribs. Platforms hung in mid-air, supported by force anchors humming at frequencies the human ear could barely catch. At the center rose the Mnemonic Loom. It was larger than the image in Selennu's message could convey. It towered over them like a frozen storm cloud sculpted in translucent metal, full of arches within arches, planes within planes. Energy crawled along its surfaces in slow pulses, sometimes stuttering, sometimes surging too fast. Mira stared up at it with awe and deep alarm. This thing is wired into how many towns, how many empath clusters? Every major city, Tenevar replied. The Threxil researcher's mind was half focused on them, half on the readings scrolling across nearby displays, and indirectly through them into almost our entire population. It carries our ritual memory, our shared grief, our celebrations. And now it carries us, Tarin said. He could feel a faint tug in his chest as he stood near it, like a memory trying to surface. Old smells, bright lights, the sick swing of his stomach during that first contact, the shape of his own fear when he had volunteered. Selennu took them to Khoruun next. The empath was kept in a chamber lined with dampening fields. The medical apparatus was sparse. Threxil technology had long ceased to treat his state as an acute injury. It was now a chronic mystery. Khoruun sat upright on a support frame, stiller than any living being should be. His eyes looked at nothing. His eye rings flickered in patterns that did not match any known Threxil code. When Tarin stepped closer, Khoruun's fingers twitched. His eye rings stuttered, locked on, then shifted. A sound scraped out of his throat. It was a human word, distorted by a mouth, not built for it. "Stop," Khoruun whispered, in accented Tarin. "Please." Tarin's breath caught. "I'm here," he said. "We're here to help you stop." Inside Khoruun's mind, the 10-second storm had never ended. He had been falling through Tarin's thoughts for 10 long years, through corridors of memory, through human self-loathing and self-forgiveness, through jokes made in pain, through the way humans learn to allow two conflicting truths to coexist without choosing one. The loom had wrapped those impressions around his own Threxil identity like an invasive vine. When he had tried to retreat, it had sealed the door behind him. Naila studied the monitor readings as Khoruun reacted. She saw something else now amid the tangle, new patterns. Human-style compartmentalization structures. Threxil empathic harmonics, bent into novel shapes. "He is adapting," she said softly. Tenevar glanced at her. "Adapting to what should not have been there." "Which is awful," Naila agreed. "And also suggests a possibility. If he can live with both, perhaps your entire network can. If we help it transform this imprint into something digestible." Selennu's field flared subtly with interest and fear. "You propose not to extract this human presence, but to reshape it." "We can't rip it out," Mira said. "From what I've seen of the loom's architecture, that would be like yanking out all the support columns because you don't like the color they're painted. The system would collapse. But we can reroute. Reframe. What does that mean, in plain terms?" Jalkar asked. "It means sending people into the loom's core," Naila said. "Humans who are used to this kind of mental chaos, guiding Khoruun from the inside to weave a new pattern, one that your network can live with." "You would go back in," Valkyrie said. Their voice carried a note of wonder. "After what one glimpse did." "That was an accident," Naila answered. "This time we prepare." The plan they shaped over the next hours was reckless and very human. They would use the loom's ancient joining protocols to link 3 minds, Naila's, Tarin's, and Khoruun's. Naila would bring the structure of therapeutic techniques from 1,000 Earth traditions of dealing with trauma and cognitive dissonance. Tarin would bring the original imprint, the map of how his thoughts had invaded the loom. Khoruun would bring access to the Threxil empathic network and the authority of someone who had survived 10 years in the storm. Mira spent the night rewiring interface harnesses so human neural signatures could be aligned with Osari conduits. She worked with fierce focus, fingers nimble, mind half-tracking error margins and half-picturing what would happen to Naila and Tarin if she got the calibration wrong. Cohenrod and Rurik walked the cavern access tunnels, mapping likely approach routes for any unauthorized strike team. They had not missed the hard, measuring looks from Jalkar's officers. If things inside the loom looked worse before they looked better, someone might panic and choose the simple solution: destroy the device. At 6 a.m. local time, deep in the reliquary's core, the 3 participants took their places in the tripartite interface. Naila lay back in her harness and thought of the countless hours she had spent staring at simulation outputs, wishing she could step inside the model. Now she would. She felt fear. A thin, cold line under the layers of determination. Tarin flexed his fingers once, unhooked each joint from tension. He thought of the moment he had raised his hand 10 years ago, and how that had been a leap into the unknown, with no preparation at all. This time, at least, he was leaping with a plan. Khoruun had no more choices to make. His consent had been recorded as best it could be, in flickers of coherent response, in stable physiological markers when the plan was explained in simple images. Somewhere inside, the version of him that had not been shattered wanted this. They dropped. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened at first. Lights on the loom brightened. Energy levels spiked along some conduits, dropped along others. The external monitors registered a surge in neural correlation coefficients. From the inside, everything changed. Naila opened her eyes onto a landscape that was not made of light or matter, but of association. Ahead of her, a street from Tarin's childhood stretched away, then curved upward into a Threxil sky. Buildings warped into bioluminescent spires halfway along. The ground beneath her feet was solid and not solid, the concept of a surface given perceptual clothing. To her left, a school hallway dissolved into a Threxil meditation grove, the lockers turning into standing stones engraved with Osari symbols. To her right, she saw layers hanging like translucent sheets, scenes from Khoruun's life, from the Threxil archive, half shredded by the passing of human images. Khoruun himself appeared as a presence, not a body, a knot of awareness flickering with two rhythms. One was Threxil harmony, the other was wild and syncopated, human mimicking. Tarin stumbled to his metaphorical feet. The world responded to his expectations. When he decided to walk, the idea of ground strengthened. "This is my head," he said, disoriented, "and not, this is what you've been living with." Khoruun's voice came as overlapping echoes. 10, thousands, endless, he said, in Threxil and in broken Tarin. He gestured, and the sky split, showing a looping replay of the initial mind scan, Tarin's thoughts roaring outward, like a solar flare, slamming into the loom's pristine Osari lattice. "This is where it went wrong," Naila said. "This is where we start." She began with what humans had always used against mental pain: structure. "Think of a story," she said to Tarin. "Your life, as a line from before the scan to now. Where are the worst parts? Where are the good parts? We'll place them," she visualized, and the landscape responded. A path appeared, marked by stones that were moments. The day Tarin learned about the mission, the second he raised his hand, the moment he heard Khoruun scream. Khoruun watched, fascinated and horrified. He had spent 10 years trapped in the loop without context. Now, for the first time, he saw the events as part of something larger, instead of as an endless now. Naila turned to him. "You have a story too," she said. "Not just about that day, about your childhood, your training, what you loved before this. Show me." It went against every habit Khoruun had left, but slowly he obeyed. Threxil memory forms appeared in the mental space. His first joining with the empath network. The glow of communal emotion during a festival. The quiet satisfaction of guiding a frightened young mind into calm. Naila took those and placed them along the same path. Human and Threxil days side by side. "Now we interleave," she said. "This is what humans do with trauma. We don't pretend it didn't happen. We plant it, among other things, so it is not the only thing." Outside, Mira watched numbers scroll across her displays. She saw phase alignments between neural fields she had not thought could ever be compared. She kept the power flows within tolerances by instinct and luck, cutting one conduit's amplitude here, boosting another's there. Above them, in the access tunnels, Conrad and Rurik heard the distant echo of shouted orders. Jalkar had decided this experiment had gone on long enough. His soldiers moved in tight formation, their orders clear. If the loom showed signs of uncontrolled feedback, they were to trigger demolition charges placed in key structural anchors. Conrad checked his sidearm, then holstered it again. He did not want to be the first human to shoot a Threxil, but he would not let them blow up the loom with Naila and Tarin inside. Inside the mindscape, tremors rippled through the constructed reality. As the external world jolted the loom structure, the sky cracked. One of Tarin's memory stones shattered, its shards turning into static. Osari glyphs flared angry red. "We're short on time," Naila said. "We have to go deeper, faster." She took a risk then that she had not fully prepared them for. She opened herself. She let her own memories rise into the shared space. Long nights poring over data, the grief of losing a parent, and the stubborn will to keep functioning. The thrill of understanding a complex system for the first time. The shame at having pushed Tarin to volunteer. The fierce, almost parental protectiveness she now felt for all of them. Khoruun reeled as the new torrent hit him. But he was not as unprepared as he had been 10 years ago. He had human-style connective tissue now. Neural pathways forced into new flexibility. The flood didn't crush him. It bent him. "See," Naila said, calm somehow, even as her own heart hammered in the shared space. "This is what our minds are always like. Terrible things next to good things. Regret next to determination. You cannot sort them by removing one side. You can only hold both." Tarin added his own piece. He showed Khoruun his recurring nightmare of the ceremony, then deliberately walked through it, altering details, giving himself a voice, letting himself say no, and then letting himself say yes again, this time with full understanding. "This is how we change the past," he said. "Not literally, but how it lives in us." Khoruun took those techniques, crude and strange as they were, and tried them on his own loop. He replayed the moment of contact from his perspective, then added scenes before and after from his own life. He gave himself more context. He allowed himself to see that he had entered the link based on trust and training, not arrogance, that he had been ambushed by incompatible complexity, not beaten by weakness. The loom responded. What had been a chaotic vortex of human images embedded in its lattice began to align along new axes. Threxil empaths across the planet who had been plagued by intrusive human dreams felt their nightmares shift. The foreign scenes remained, but now they came with a sense of before and after, of direction, instead of as meaningless eruptions. In the Surat Cavern's access tunnels, Jalkar's soldiers reached the last turn before the core chamber. Coenrod and Rurik stood at the bottleneck with a handful of Threxil guards loyal to Selennu. Weapons were drawn but aimed low. "Stand down," Coenrod called. "The loom's readings are stabilizing. That stabilization may just be the prelude to a greater failure," the lead Threxil officer replied. Their orders from Jalkar pounded at the front of their mind like drumbeats. Duty, protection, purity. Rurik took a step forward, palms spread wide. "We came here to repair what we broke," he said. "If you destroy it now, you're killing your empaths and our friends. Let them finish. If it goes wrong, you can still blow the place up in 5 minutes." He meant it. Inside his head, the calculation was ugly and honest. If Naila and Tarin died but the loom and the Threxil network lived, it would be a loss with meaning. If everything died, it would be pointless. The Threxil officer hesitated. He could feel, through his weaker empathic sense, that something was changing in the background field, a quality of tension easing, a murmur of unfamiliar but not hostile patterns. He signaled his squad to hold. In the mental landscape, the tremors slowed. The sky knit itself back together in bands of mixed Tarin blue and Vastrion Kal's luminous dusk. The path Naila had constructed now wound through scenes from 3 lives, and from shared memory pulled from the loom itself. Threxil ceremonies, human protests, interspecies celebrations. Khoruun stood at the center of it all, or rather, the presence that was Khoruun pulsed there, its rhythms now a composite. He felt himself as singular in a way he never had before, existing not only as a node in a network, but as a distinct self. It hurt. It thrilled. "This is wrong," he said in his own language. "And it is right. It is new," Vale Kree's voice murmured from the echoing edges. The seer, linked as an external observer, watched the formation of a third pattern they had not foreseen. Naila looked around the restructured space. "The human imprint isn't gone," she said. "It's just woven in at a scale your network can handle. It becomes texture instead of rupture. You will always carry a bit of us now, Tarin said to Khoruun. Khoruun's answer was simple. Then do not abandon us. They rose from the loom like swimmers, breaking the surface of a dark lake. In the physical chamber, their bodies jerked under the harnesses, then stilled. Medical teams rushed forward, checking vitals, monitors. Naila's eyes snapped open first. Sensory overload hit her in a wave. The smell of coolant, the buzz of conduits, the weight of gravity. Underneath, she still felt faint echoes of the shared space, like afterimages. Tarin woke next. His first coherent thought was, it worked. His second was a flood of doubt. Did it? Then he felt the air around him change as the Threxil present all flinched in near unison. Khoruun had opened his eyes. The pattern of light around his irises was different. The flicker had a slight irregularity. A very human rhythm of imperfection layered atop the old steady beat. He scanned the room, posture no longer slack, but wary. Alive. Noise, he said. His voice gained strength with every word. Less now. Bearable. Selennu made a sound that, in their species, was the equivalent of a sob of relief. Fleet Marshal Jalkar stepped forward. Every muscle in his body held rigid. He searched Khoruun's face for signs of contamination, madness, weakness. What are we now? He asked quietly. Khoruun turned his head, listening inward. Through him, the Mnemonic Loom's reconfigured pattern pulsed along empathic channels, reshaping Threxil's subjective experience. Some who had never known privacy now tasted it. Some who had always flowed with the group now felt the edges of a self. We are many, Khoruun said. We are still ourselves. But not only as we were, we have learned to dream as individuals and wake as a people. His gaze slid to Naila and Tarin. He saw them now not as sources of rupture, but as carriers of a skill his culture had lacked, the brutal, flexible, improvisational capacity to live with contradictions instead of smoothing them away. You are dangerous, he said to them. There was no malice in it. Your mind's cut, but you also know how to bind the wounds you cause. Daud, who had watched the loom readings shift from chaos to coherent new pattern, felt a knot loosen in his chest. Humanity would never again be just an object lesson in telepathic hazard. They had shown up when it mattered, and offered what only they could. In the assembly that followed on Vastrion Kal, Threxil leaders argued and questioned and redefined. The polyglot Athril sent observers. Khoruun spoke, not for all Threxil, but as one who had passed through fire. We feared that the human presence would erase us, he told them. Instead, it has given us a choice we never had, to be part of the group and still hold something back as ours alone. This, individuality, it is disruptive. Many will hate it. Some will cling to it. We will need help to learn how to carry it without tearing ourselves apart. He looked at Naila as he said the last part. A new agreement emerged in careful language. Telepathic species would avoid casual scans of human minds. Human volunteers would train with Threxil specialists to become guides in psychic emergencies. The Mnemonic Loom would remain active under joint stewardship, no longer a sacred relic used without understanding, but a tool for exploration. Weeks later, back on Aphelia Truss, in a small, quiet chamber overlooking the stars, Naila stood beside archivist Selennu in front of a compact, moderated interface derived from the loom's design. After all of that, Selennu said, you are still willing to connect again. Naila laughed softly. I study minds. We just found a new way to do it, and we both have a lot to learn from each other. This time, we go slow. No grand rituals, just two people taking a careful look. Selennu's bioluminescent rings glowed a thoughtful green. We used to think that touching another's thoughts meant we understood them entirely. Your species has taught us that a glimpse can be the most misleading thing of all. That cuts both ways, Naila said. We thought we could handle any data. We were wrong. Now we know better. They sat opposite each other, connected by a device that hummed softly, well within the safe limits Mira and Tenevar had established. Outside the viewport, a Threxil ship and the Starglint Voyager drifted in peaceful proximity. As the gentle field rose and their minds brushed in a new, carefully crafted link, the galaxy expanded by another subtle degree. Not because of new weapons or faster drives, but because one species had dared to share the most terrifyingly dense, contradictory, explosive thing it possessed, and then had dared to return to clean up the wreckage it caused. For all their fragility, for all the damage they could do by simply being what they were, humans had shown something no one in the polyglot Athril would forget. When they broke something, they came back for it.